today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about workaholism, or working too much to avoid the pain of your relationship. Workaholism often hides in plain sight because it looks like a virtue, particularly in American culture. But when providing becomes escaping, the cost is often intimacy. It is a cultural disease. Why do we call it workaholism? Because there is an addictive quality to it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship, and I'm your host, Rich Heller. And today, we are talking about workaholism disguised as dedication. And this is an example of a culturally sanctioned escape, an escape hatch, sometimes from our marriage, sometimes from other things. But this is Rich in Relationship, so we're going to talk about in our marriage. I tell myself I'm working hard for my family, but lately my wife says I'm using work to avoid her. I'm not cheating. I'm not angry. I'm just more comfortable at work. Why does it feel easier there than at home? And this is a great question. And a lot of guys express this with a lot more emotion, by the way. Some guys say, I tell myself I'm working hard for my family. Why the hell doesn't my wife understand what I'm doing here? It costs a lot of money to pay for all of this. And I can tell you that some women do this too. In fact, the studies show that 29% of households have women as the primary wage earner, and I promise you they are working their buns off to do that and feel very much the same way. This is not a uniquely male disease. It is a cultural disease. Why do we call it workaholism? Because there is an addictive quality to it. There is, we did a whole series on screens as addiction, and so there's like a huge background here in Rich in Relationship. But for those of you who have not yet tuned into those episodes, I'll explain it to you this way. As human beings, we are designed for seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. That's like what the nervous system is made to do. And when we accomplish something, that's pleasure, right? Accomplished something, check. Went through my email and cleared it out, check. Did what I said I was going to do today, check. Recorded another episode of Rich in Relationship, check. These are all things that help us feel good. I feel good just saying it. Honestly, can you see the change in my energy? I feel it. I say, did it, check, and I feel a little better. We're wired for this. When it becomes an ism or an addictive thing is when we seek the pleasure over the pain, right? And this listener is talking about, hey, I'm doing the right thing by my family. Check. I'm earning money. Check. I'm developing myself at my workplace. Check. Yeah, so maybe I'm sacrificing my family a little to do that, but it feels good. And he admits he's more comfortable at work. Why is it easier than at home? And that's because at home, for sure, this listener is being confronted with situations that you just can't fix and go check. At work, 99% of the time, if it's a healthy workplace, the goal of our job and how it contributes to the overarching goal of the business are pretty clear. And when we fail to hit the goal, we know it. And when we succeed, we know it. And when our boss comes to us and asks us to make an adjustment, we generally adjust. At home, you're in a partnership. There's often some battle over who is the boss. And there isn't as much clarity about the purpose of the marriage and the behavior within that purpose. And so, because it's fuzzier and it's harder to go, did it, check. Because it's a process that involves constant nurturing, it's harder to have some instant joy. And the other person comes into the relationship with their stuff. And when they do, and we can't make them happy because we can't make anyone do anything. We can't make anyone feel anything. That's when things get really muddy. Work is a socially approved addiction because this country focuses on productivity and competition. We want to have the highest gross national product. We want to have the most powerful military. We want to have the most influential influence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And work is the viewed way to get there. We have a culture built on a Puritan ethic, which is sacrifice a little today so that you can have more tomorrow. Now, that ethic originally was about work a little longer, rest a little less, so that you can store away enough to have greater wealth in the future. But it wasn't sacrifice your family so that you can work more. That's what it wasn't. In fact, usually the whole family engaged in that ethic together. In the days that that ethic evolved, the Puritan work ethic, the whole family worked together. And so it was about the whole family sacrificing dessert, the money that might be spent on dessert, so that money could be reinvested in machinery that would make work more productive. That was the original concept, but we've twisted it into, I'm going to sacrifice family time to grow my work time. I myself am guilty, right? I'd love to tell you I'm a perfect example of this, but I spent decades sacrificing family time to have more profit because it was an area I could control and understand, and I could get a clear manual on. I didn't have a clear manual on marriage. We don't have a clear manual on marriage. By the way, this podcast is to help you develop your manual. And what happened was, and what happens for a lot of my listeners, is providing morphs into avoidance. Because emotional connection, let's be honest, it can be confusing. Emotional connection can even feel a little threatening at times. And when we leave home and we're like, what the heck happened there? What's going on? Why did he talk to me that way? Why did she say that? I don't understand why my kid, was caught making out in that parking lot. I don't understand. When those things happen, we slip into the emotional anesthesia of productivity, things that are more manageable, where control seems to be clearer, where there's greater clarity, and where our own competence can shine. Now, the paradox here is that workaholism isn't just about ambition, it's also about escape. So let me tell you about my good friends, Brad and Gwen. Brad was always proud of his work success. He worked long hours, constant emails. He'd be checking his email before dinner, at dinner, sometimes even during dinner, let's be honest. He'd have calls on the weekend, calls overseas, right? He had clients in Asia, so he had to work at night. Instead of spending time with his wife and family, he'd be on calls to Japan or whatever. That's what success looked like for him. And Gwen, who also worked, by the way, admired his drive, even supported it. But over time, she noticed that he was never fully home and that she was carrying the emotional load. She was managing his feelings about his work. He would come to her with, I'm just so confused. I felt, why did this happen? Da, da, da. And she'd help him sort that out. She was carrying the emotional load of the kids, and she's working full time. Often Brad would come through the door and a part of him would still be at meetings, and dinner would turn into just something else for him to do so he could get back to it. And Gwen started saying things like this, you're always working. And Brad would respond, guess what he'd say? I have to. You like that car? I'm the prime breadwinner. I have to do this, even though she was actually earning a significant amount of money. The truth was harder to admit because work made sense to Brad. What was going on at home, emotionally, even what was happening at work didn't make a lot of sense to him. Only Gwen could sort it out. They call that man-keeping now. The emotional side just didn't make sense, but work did. At work, he's competent. At home, he felt criticized, lost, even like he's not a part of. He wasn't always sure what his mission was at home. He wasn't sure what his mission was at home. He was sure what his mission was at work. And when Gwen said she missed him. When Gwen said she missed Brad, when Gwen said the kids missed Brad, what did Brad hear? He didn't hear, wow, she really loves me. What he heard was criticism. And after a while, she's just stopped. She gave up. She felt like a single mom almost, even though he was living in the same house. She stopped asking him to slow down because it always ended in a fight. He would say things like, yuck, like my work doesn't matter. He'd explain to her, I'm learning things, I'm growing through my work. This is what I went to college for. So there she was, a single parent, kind of. She was really a single parent with 3 kids. There were the 2 kids they had together, and then emotionally, that was him. And by the time they came to me for help, their emotional bank was severely in the red. There was no high interest yield happening there because they had withdrawn all the goodwill and good feelings they'd put in the emotional bank. And what was left was defensiveness, criticism, and blame. By the time they came to us, Gwen said to me, he's addicted to his job. And Brad said, she's always criticizing me. Work is the only place where I feel successful. So what happened? What changed? Working together, we gave Brad and Gwen this frame of workaholism, work addiction. We pointed out what was happening, how the dynamic had become so negative, so critical that it had become, I'm going to win, you're going to lose, that they couldn't hear each other. And once we gave them the tools, they started to see what was really going on. Brad recognized that, yeah, honestly, he was escaping into work because he just didn't know how to deal with what was going on at home. He still thought it was important, but he recognized that it was a strategy for coping that wasn't really working in the long run. It just made him feel better at the expense of everyone else. And he realized that he wasn't a bad guy. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he just didn't know how to manifest his care in a way that made a difference with his family. Gwen recognized that she had enabled him in this behavior by showing up around his inadequacies when it came to labeling his emotions, his inadequacies when it came to speaking about his emotions. She had spoken a lot of it for him. She had felt like she'd taken what was working with the kids and done that with him, and it really didn't work. She realized that she needed to encourage him to share his feelings more without criticizing them, without attacking him. Right? She realized that part of her job, because she was more emotionally literate than him, was to help him label his emotions and express them. Brad started spending more time at home because it became safer. Gwen stopped saying, I miss you, I need you, why are you always away? And she started just helping him when he came to her with his problems, helping him name his feelings and talk through them. And then she started using that as a springboard to say, I know how that feels. Because sometimes I feel like that here. Sometimes I feel like that at my work. In working together at Rich in Relationship, Brad started to realize that he had a purpose in his household also. He started to realize that this very goal-focused approach he had at work could apply at home. He just needed to get clearer what it was. And so the first goal he set when we were all working together was that he was going to be the foundation for a more emotionally literate conversation with his wife and his kids, allowing her to be the educator, but him taking the lead and encouraging this kind of conversation. In other words, he took the lead in their family being more emotionally fluent, is what I'm trying to say, talking about feelings more contextually, but he honored that Gwen was much, much better at it than him. So as the leader, he took a skill he learned at work. He took the lead in a certain direction, but he honored the strengths of his partner and leaned into her strengths. And she allowed him to take the lead in this regard because she honored his need, desire, training to hit goals and milestones. We had seen this pattern before, right? In earlier episodes like Can You Build Wealth and Stay Emotionally Present here on Rich in Relationship, we talked about how provision without presence leaves both partners unsatisfied. With Brad and Gwen, we reframed workaholism not as selfishness, but as a couple of things: emotional flight and movement towards the familiar. So Brad wasn't just chasing success, right? Because let's face it, who doesn't like success? He was moving away from being vulnerable in a situation where vulnerability felt threatening. We reframed Gwen's resentment. It wasn't about time, how much time Brad was spending. It was about her feeling he was absent. And so we worked on some exercises to help Brad deal with the ism part of his work and to help build some emotional fluency, that emotional fluency we were just talking about. First, Brad journaled daily for 2 weeks about when he felt the urge to work when he was at home. And he and Gwen set some really clear boundaries. There was a cutoff time for work. In the same way that there was a cutoff time for screens for their kids, there was a cutoff time for work. That didn't mean that he didn't have to do that work that he needed to in Japan and Asia, but there were certain hours when that was okay, after the kids went to bed, after he and Gwen had finished talking. And there were certain hours where they weren't. In fact, the pattern that they established was they all had dinner together, which wasn't happening before. And the studies about having dinner together show that this really bonds a family. And it is the opportunity to develop emotional fluency. Then Brad helped put the kids together, which he hadn't been doing earlier. Then, after the kids were put together, he said to Gwen, I need to go take care of some of this Asian business. I hope I get to see you before you go to sleep tonight. And Gwen said, what time will you be done? And he said, I will make sure I am done by 10:30. And, let's chat before we go to sleep. So he bookended that experience of having to work in the evening so that he had time for all of those things and limited it. And Gwen expressed her needs. She said, hey, you know what? I know sometimes if your calls can go a little longer. I want you to know if I'm asleep when you come back, it's not because I'm mad at you. I understand completely. But why don't we do a morning check-in? Instead, let's catch up then because I need my sleep. I love you and I want to wait for you. And I understand that you have things you need to get done too. They developed emotional fluency, both around his work needs and the family needs. They practiced emotional labeling. They practiced micro-connection, tell me good things. They practiced transition rituals between work and family, right? I would like to say work and home, but some of Brad's work was happening at the home. And honestly, right, I work at home. We practice those things here. These are the things that help to create boundaries between work and family so that work doesn't become an ism or an avoidance mechanism. What they did, both of them, was they replaced avoidance with alignment. We helped them design what we call value-linked productivity. We helped Brad align his drive for achievement with family values. We took that drive for achievement that worked so well for him at work and was a little bit of an avoidance mechanism and rewired it for family values around self-expression, communication, connection, boundaries. And after a few months, Gwen said, he still works a lot. But now, when he's home, it's really clear that he's with us when he's with us and when he's at work. Now, when he's at the dinner table, the phone is somewhere else. Now, he checks his email at specific times, and then after a certain time, he stops. Now, if he has to work late, the next day, he shares with me what happened and apologizes for not being able to check in with me at night. And in the morning, we make it up. Workaholism often hides in plain sight because it looks like a virtue, particularly in American culture. But when providing becomes escaping, the cost is often intimacy. Worse than that, when providing becomes escaping, not only do we lose intimacy, but we start to engage more and more in what we call here at Rich in Relationship destructive conflict, which takes away from that emotional bank that's so important to happy and successful families. If work has become a hiding place for you, I strongly suggest you go to our free community group, The Bridge, at richinrelationship.com. It's just the name of this podcast without any spaces.com. Rich in Relationship, singular.com. And you will find a free community page there with resources to help you express feelings, to figure out where you are, to really introduce you to this concept of the emotional bank. And if you want, you can schedule a free call, whatever works for you. And in the meantime, I want you to have an amazing day and a fantastic tomorrow. Thank you.